Welcome to the DSEF. The Direct Selling Executives Forum was created to be a place where real direct selling executives and vendors in the space can come out and share solutions to challenges that face us all in the marketplace. Our guest today is going to be unpacking a topic and sharing their raw thoughts for you to learn from. All right, let's go meet our guest. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Direct Selling Executives Forum's open forum. Today is a total treat. Many of you have been asking questions about M&A, that's mergers and acquisition frameworks in the space. And when we thought about this topic, we said, okay, we know who we want to bring to this call. And so for those of you that are not familiar with Troy Keller, as a background, Troy Keller is a partner at a national law firm. He's at Dorsey Whitney. And over the years, Troy and his firm have represented some of direct selling's largest companies in their most important transactions. Troy personally represents the Utah Direct Selling Coalition, an association in Utah's leading companies inside of the industry. And before Dorsey, Troy was vice president of corporate law and global government relationships at Huntsman Corporation. Previous to Huntsman, he was a securities and M&A counsel at Quest Communications, and he began his career as an attorney at the New York office of Sidley Austin. Troy is a frequent commenter in business and media publications and is admitted into practice law in New York, Colorado, and Utah. Troy, super excited to have you on today. This is going to be a really fun session. There's so many questions around this framework, and I can't wait to jump in. And so with that, let's go ahead and start the show. So Umair, the floor is yours. Let's go ahead and jump on in.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben.
Excellent.
Good morning, everybody. Troy, thank you very much for joining us today. It's an absolute honor to have you on today, sir. And as we kick off, the topic of today's conversation is rather very interesting, and that is mergers and acquisitions framework. So we will talk about all the frameworks, but let's unpack your story before we start. How did you first come into this direct selling space, and what's your why today?
Oh, you bet. So, well, first, I will just say that it's an honor for me to be here, of course. I love your podcast. I love the industry. And so I'm super excited to have this conversation. I think that M&A is an important part of any company's strategy. We're going to talk about that today. So yeah, the direct selling space, I have lived off and on in Utah for much of my life. And my wife's from here, and this has been our home for a couple of decades now. And direct selling, as everyone knows, is the thing in Utah. Friends and us and family have been involved in it forever. And then when I joined Dorsey Whitney as a firm, we're a national firm, but our Utah office is significant, and we have just been representing this industry for a very long time now, going back to some of its roots. And again, sort of, just glad to be part of it.
Very cool. Well, I'm just excited because for those of you that are familiar with the space, and you may say, well, I've actually never worked with Dorsey and these groups, and you haven't heard of them before. These truly are the biggest companies we've served.
Yeah.
Groups like the family behind New Skin when they went public, the people that they trusted to work with them. And so there's big brands here that you'll be able to learn from in their world today. So I'm excited for us to jump right in.
Absolutely, yes. The second question from the panel, Troy, is what do deal markets look right now? Is timing good to be doing transactions in the deal market?
Yeah, so it has changed dramatically just over the last few weeks, and probably everyone knows why. But I tell you, in January and February, we were all very excited. It was all pistons were firing. We had a slate of more deal work than we could do as a firm, and I think that was the case for a lot of people in the sector. It was exciting. We were looking forward to 2025 being the year when things kind of break free. And right now the market, the turmoil, the uncertainty is never good for deals. Sure. So as you can imagine, no one wants to place a big bet on the future when you don't know what the future is going to look like. And obviously the executive orders, the tariffs have been a big part of that. So I would say it hasn't stopped, but everyone has slowed down a little bit. No one wants to walk away from deals they were looking at or thinking about or in the middle of, but they want to just give it a little bit of time. So everything has just slowed down. So I think it's still potentially going to be a good year. Right now, it's certainly slow.
Yeah.
Yep. So what types of deals are available to direct selling companies right now? Mergers, joint ventures, licensing deals, all, what are those deals?
There's no reason that a direct selling company, it's sort of hard to think of a type of deal that isn't available to them.
Sure.
The IPO markets, I know that's not M&A, but the IPO market's kind of the availability of capital go hand in hand. There hasn't been much on that front for a while now. So that maybe is one that's not, but really everything else is on the table. I think private equity kind of comes and goes into this sector. We've seen it have some rough times with some of the companies it's invested in over the years. But otherwise, companies are always looking at deals. I favor acquisitions that a direct selling company wants to grow and get bigger. Acquisitions, I think, is a really important and great strategy for that. The exits also people think about, like, we built something, we want to cash out. That's also available, but I would say more frequent types of deals are the acquisitions. I like joint ventures for international work. Anyway, we can unpack that. Different deals for different strategies, right? But really, it's all on
Yeah.
the table.
I think is interesting is a lot of times when we talk about M&A, Troy, people only think about acquisitions or only think about someone who's, their next generation didn't want to take over or there wasn't a legacy, so they wanted to move somewhere else as a next step. And we miss some of those international frameworks. So when we do get the frameworks, I'm excited to unpack some of that further. I think that makes a ton of sense for people to be thinking about, even in the smallest terms
Absolutely.
we've heard of in consolidation in the space today. One of our clients was sharing warehouses with one of their competitors, right? Where they just shared real estate, right? Inside of the world. And just at it's a very small idea of a joint venture, but there's been a lot of different collaboration opportunities that help. And I think the international conversation on joint ventures is actually a really exciting one. So yeah, looking forward to the frameworks
Yeah.
today. That's going to be a good
Well,
one.
and maybe
Absolutely.
one more thing to mention there is the backwards integration too. Like,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, yours as an example about sharing the real estate. A lot especially in the nutraceutical side of it, a lot of companies are backwards integrated. They do their own manufacturing,
Yep.
and you see a lot of joint ventures in that space.
Yeah. Big
Absolutely.
part to be thinking
Yeah.
about.
So let's talk about the frameworks. Your team has been involved in both acquisition and taking companies like Newskin public. For the listeners on the show today, what frameworks have you found helpful to those that are thinking about acquiring other companies to expand their footprint?
I think that you've got look at it a few different ways. You think about currency. So are you going to
Yeah.
use your company's equity as your acquisition currency? Are you going to use cash? Are you going to do a recap of the target as you're doing it, where you bring in maybe third-party capital? And so those are all on the table. I will say, especially in this space, because it's not cash rich, but there's plenty of cash flowing. There's some sectors like technology where the cash has to come externally because companies are burning cash. In the direct selling
Yeah.
industry, there's a little more cash flow, right? And so if your company can spare some, then that is usually the best currency both for the target and for yourself, because especially if you're a company that's public, you don't want to dilute your shareholders, or if you're a company that is
Yeah.
private and you're owned by a family, for example, you don't want to really bring in other people into the ownership profile most of the time. So kind of a cash approach is good. But even if you're doing a cash acquisition, and it's frequent, you'll see that you don't buy the whole company at once. So that could be a framework where you say, look, we're going to buy a majority interest, and then we'll have the right as the acquirer to buy the rest over time. I think like you saw, the USANA deal was done that way. And that's where it's kind of a complementary deal. You're saying, we're going to own you, but we're not going, we're going to leave the management team intact. You're going to have the ability to have a second bite at the apple, so to speak, as the target. If you can increase the value, then we'll do like the second stage, and then you'll benefit even more. So that's a nice framework that incentivizes the management team to carry on and to be focused and to work with you as a partner going forward. So earnouts are another framework that kind of accomplish that as well, where you do buy 100%, but you let them still get more purchase price later on down the transaction, down the road, a year or 2 years out, if the business performs as everyone hopes and expects it will.
Find those really, really interesting when you think about these structures in the space, because we've had speakers on previously here on the panel. We had Mark Andrus and the team from Squire on, and they've been doing benchmark studies for years in the direct selling space of where we anonymize different billion-dollar MLM companies' data back to them, and they have basically a P&L by percentage, Troy, right? Okay, here's your commissions costs, here's your product costs, and the part that I think always amazes people when they go through that, and it's basically their gift to anyone who meets with them over at Sovos. And what Mark highlighted that I think is something really interesting from your comment of the family acquiring with cash is how much cash benchmark is that these businesses do spin off. A lot of us don't really think about that at times because as you're running your own direct selling company or you're an executive on a team, you may just be focused on investments and growing the business and everything else. But a healthy direct selling company, according to Squire Sovos, right, spins off almost 13% of top line revenue, guys, in cash. And you got to think about that for a second.
That's
They say
better than a profit margin. That's cash. Yeah.
Cash. That's 12.8 is their number in their most recent study. And so one of the things to think about stewardship wise, right, as you're listening to this podcast today, whether you are part of one of the families that owns a company or whether you are an executive on the team, is having a real conversation with your ownership team about how acquisitions will play a role in your future. And as we listen to Troy today, I truly hope you're thinking about that, because on my side as a service provider and Umair's side, like, we are seeing consolidation like no other. There is a lot of people where,
Yeah.
whether something happened from COVID or they were just holding on from something in the past, or the next generation doesn't want the business out of the family, where there's a lot of consolidation opportunities in this space. And yet, cash wise, if you're running a
Yeah.
healthy direct selling business, you likely have 12.8 if you're on target, right? Of cash. So you want to be having real conversations about what this can look like, right? So
So remarkable. It's a
yeah,
remarkable industry, and that's one of the reasons why.
Oh,
exactly,
what
exactly.
frameworks have you found valuable for those who want to sell their company?
It's a good
Um,
conversation.
yeah. Well, can I, and if, are you okay if I change the word framework to word process?
Yes, yes,
Yes,
yes,
Because,
yes.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
works for
because
yes.
us. Yep.
yeah, I mean, I was a junior lawyer, a couple, I don't know, almost 30 years ago. And I had some great mentors that said, Troy, process is king, process drives results. I didn't understand it for a lot of years. And now I
Yeah,
understand it so much better. And company wants to sell itself. So many, especially smaller companies, are like, do I want to hire a consultant, like an M&A advisor? Why should I do that? I know I want to sell to this guy across the street. We've been talking about it for a year now.
yeah,
I've got a buyer. I'm just going to go do that. And that is really unfortunate, frankly, because it's a big world out there. There are a lot of potential
yeah,
buyers. And you want to, I mean, your main job, you only get to sell your company once, and you really need to maximize your value. And that's your chance. And,
yeah,
and so you got to do what's called, what we call a sales process. And that starts with hiring. Of course, you don't legally have to, but boy, if you want to maximize revenue, you need to have an advisor, someone who is going to go out and just canvas the landscape, make sure you get. And there's a process. There's a kind of well-trodden path there. They help you first create some documents to present your business. You hire a lawyer like me, and we get involved and we help you make sure that when those people get a look at your business, that they are doing
yeah,
so in a way that protects you, and they're not really just looking at the cover so they can take advantage of it later. That's all restricted and taken care of. And then you start reaching out to dozens potential buyers who will come in, take a quick look. Then you ask them to say how interested they are. They provide a letter of
mm,
intent. And you kind of do that stage after stage. And it takes a few months to work through the process, but
yeah.
that's how you know that you've maximized your value. And then you'll know you've gotten the best price that was available at that time for your business. And so that process, I think, is just really key.
One of the questions in that process that we get all the time versus other industries too is like, how do people value direct selling companies? And would you mind
You know?
just speaking to what you've seen there of different just models of value? Because this is not like tech companies that are 20x revenue or these wild numbers that
Right.
you hear about on other things. What are some of the different ways you've seen people value companies in this space? I think that would be very helpful for
Yeah.
people who are listening to. Yeah. What have you seen?
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's definitely, the multiples are how people, that's kind of the first cut at everything. And you kind of
Sure.
say, okay, every couple months they tend to move around a little bit. And I
Mm,
think, and also even in the direct selling space, depending on what's cool about direct selling is it's a type of selling, it's a platform approach. But then you have your product line as well. And
yeah,
some products, frankly, at different times are going to be hotter than others. So the multiple varies. So sometimes you
yeah,
might just get, single digit multiple. Sometimes you get a double digit multiple. And it depends on size, and it depends on, again, kind of the vertical that you're in terms of product lines. Sometimes, in a company that's kind of struggling, they might look more at revenue, but still it tends to be an earnings. So one part of that
yeah,
process that I mentioned is this quality of earnings exercise where
mm,
Yeah.
you'll get an accounting firm to come in and really scrub your numbers, but also present them in the best light and say, look, to company XYZ, you might have thought your earnings were 30 million a year. Actually, they were 32, because all you have to do is stop doing this thing that you've been doing, or you shouldn't have counted this growth cost that you had, this transactional cost, and that's out of the way behind you now. So, so anyway, so that's a really good exercise. And then once you have your earnings, then you can, you try to find a multiple that is appropriate. Your advisor helps a lot on that front. I will say on that side, that piece, and this kind of it goes for the buyers too. Smaller
yeah,
companies tend to, not always, but oftentimes tend to have smaller multiples because they don't
Yep.
have the scale that gives them kind of that stability and the ability to growth platform scale. So as a buyer, frankly, lots of times you can say, I'm going to do bite-size acquisitions because I can get a smaller multiple. In the moment,
mm,
and this is kind of alchemy, but the moment, again, kind of a solid platform, you buy a small business, maybe for 6 or 7 multiple, and you bring it into your platform and you're trading, or could, if you're public, you'd be trading maybe at a 10 or 11 or 12 multiple. And now all of a sudden, those earnings for that company have kind of, ratcheted up. And right there, you've created value just by bringing them in. And you still have to prove it through integration and making it work over time. But on the face of it, it's just a great way to build value as a platform. But the lesson for a smaller company is pick your timing too. You might have people saying, look, I can make you a millionaire overnight. It's very tempting. But if you wait a little while longer and you get a little more scale, your multiple is going to go up as part of that.
To that point, as Troy's talked about, we've seen a number of clients and companies in space who've had that strategy of acquiring, smaller direct selling businesses and bringing them in. And the challenge there always becomes adoption and assimilating them into your culture and how you do that. And we actually have a full episode on that previously in the series.
Oh, I missed that. I need to watch that. Yeah.
We will add that to the show notes of just what are some of the best practices when you merge a cultures, gang. And so we'll want to make sure you start to get to that, because there's some very human parts that I think are very important thinking about in there. But it's our certain companies who have made it a wildly successful strategy to choice. And if you are trading multiple, it's instant value in that sense, because you are acquiring them a lot less. That's good.
So for those who want to go public, what first steps would you share with them, Troy?
I love this question because, like I said, the IPO markets haven't been super friendly the last little bit. Yeah. But we had this back kind of moment a few years ago, and there was a lot of potential opportunity there. And but the window got closed on that. With deregulation going forward, let's say we get the tariff stuff all behind us, and I'm going to take the White House at their word, even though things change every day. But that in 90 days we'll have some certainty. Okay, great. So 90 days from now, let's say that we kind of know what the world is going to look like going forward. Yeah. That's when hopefully the deregulation benefits of this administration kick in. And I think it's appropriate for us to kind of look and talk about policy a little bit, because that policy, once you have a clear future and certainty, and if you're in a deregulatory environment, that's when the transactions break free, in particular on the capital market side. So that includes, like I said, the IPO front. And so it now might be a smart time to start saying, look, I think we would like to be a public company. Let's start preparing now. And you really need to give yourself a good year of runway. So you need to have, 3 years of kind of audited financial statements. So you've got to have, if you don't have those, you've been a private company and no one's really asked you to do that, or you just did an acquisition and you don't have your consolidated financials kind of put together yet. Give yourself a year of runway to put those together. And then you've got to think about governance. And some of that can be done more or less last minute, but you've got to have a public company board, right? So you got to have a majority of independent directors to serve on your board. And you want some people that are going to be both great advisors and partners for the business, but also people that the public markets will respect and say, okay, they've got good people that we can trust as shareholders to kind of be the fiduciaries for that business.
And Troy, I have one bit of a kind of a curveball baseball question here about going public, because of that 1 year runway that I know is in the minds of many, many, many of the listeners. And I want to throw it out there and open for opinion. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, but we have seen many of the bigger players in direct sales or referral marketing work to rebrand away from MLM in preparation for other acquisitions, other market acceptance things, just because of the American stigmatism. I mean, I truly say American. It is not that way.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Globally at all. And we know that referral marketing, this thing called referral marketing, where people share products and services they care deeply about with their trust relationships, is never going away, right? There's all kinds of flavors. There's over here on the end affiliates or referral partners or certified resellers or customer rewards programs. And then over here on the far end of the spectrum, and the spectrum's really of rewards for making sales personally versus rewards for mentoring a sales team who makes sales, right? MLM way on the far spectrum over here. And for many of the direct selling clients we of course have rewards not just for making sales yourself, but rewards for helping people on your team make sales in that world, and that all legitimate direct selling MLM companies do. And we've seen this move. I could go back to even, I guess I could say Neora, right, or Modere, who has just closed their doors from their experience. We were all mourning that with different friends.
That was unfortunate.
The only word I have for what happened at Modere. But they moved to these words like, well, we're an affiliate program, or we're social sellers, or we're using influencers to promote our brand. So for some of the just older brands that are in our space that are thinking about, hey, in this next generation, we're not going to sell, but we are thinking of going public with the markets. Trump's in office here in America. We think that after this tariff thing's over, we do want to start our 1 year now and do it during Trump's election. If
Yeah.
there's someone who's sitting right there, what would be your opinion? Not that it's right or wrong, but should they work on rebranding what their referral marketing is or not? Right? And from your perspective, what you've seen on that side, I'm just curious. I know that's in a lot of people's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great, and I frankly had not, I mean, I understand all the dynamics you're talking
Sure,
about because,
sure.
we live and breathe it with our clients every day. I think that, but I mentioned that question in that IPO context. So every company, when they go public, they have to tell a story, and
Yeah.
that is so
Yeah.
key. I mean, you've got to get two things that are important to the market, frankly. I mean, this is just the Troy Keller view. They're really two
Sure.
things. You'll have like hundreds of pages of SEC filings that
Yeah.
provide, all these
Yeah.
details. Well, the two most important things, one are your financial statements.
Yeah.
Investors,
Yeah.
some investors, they don't care what you call yourself or what you do. The proof is in the pudding. They want to see returns. And so the financial statements are
True.
just huge there and key, need to be scrubbed, need to show the right trend, all that. The other thing is the future, and the future is the story. And so every IPO struggles with that. They've got to catch the wave that they're trying to
Yeah.
catch, whatever that might be, whatever trend they
Yeah.
want to sort of be associated with. They've also got to show how they're a unique story.
Yeah.
And so I mean, so what you described, I do think there's room for companies to say, look, we're going to lean in, we're going to be full on MLM. That's us.
Yeah.
Investors, that's what's going to make a lot of money. So you should love that. I could see that being a very attractive story. I love, like when you hear Kirk Jowers, doTERRA talk, I love the
Yeah.
way he describes the industry. He says, "Look,
Yeah.
this is people need social connection. We provide that, and it's not going away." Like you just said, Ben. I think there are different ways to tell the story, and I see no reason why someone couldn't say, "We are full on MLM. That's what
Yeah.
this is the glory of that. It makes lots of money, it makes a lot of people happy, and investors, you should get that." And I think that could be very, very persuasive.
In that we're doing it the right way, right? Is that whole vision of vision
Yeah.
casting in your story, I think is the really important point to get to because we also we're not seeing this go away. That's the one thing I think is really important to understand. Like gig work as a trend, right? These
Yeah.
things we all do outside of our W-2 job as Americans, right? To earn additional income for our family. That is like a hockey stick growth as far as industry.
Oh
And
yeah.
MLM is a huge part of that. And so leaning into like, hey, this is the ultimate gig for the person who loves X, Y, and Z is a big part of your story. And I would just say to echo what Troy shared in his opinion too, from my perspective too, is you just be clear and lead. There's so much to be said about
Yeah.
just here's who we're for, and then more importantly, here's who we're not for. I love one of Seth Godin's most recent book. Seth's kind of a funny thought leader, right? I always love his stuff, but he said that
He's great.
you don't know your marketing message in his most recent book until you can say this is not for you. And I love that picture, right? And I think we have to stop being afraid, different folks who are listening, of being like, well, we want to be available to everybody in your messaging, in your story. You're not. You actually don't want that. Then nobody is excited about you. You want to be able to tell your story in a way where this is who we're for, and we're not for these people over here, and that actually
Yeah.
it'll be freeing to you in a big way. So just great stuff to
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
agree with that. One more just small thing to
yeah,
add on to that
Sure.
is talking about the deregulatory market. We should have mentioned this whole earnings claim
yes, yeah,
rulemaking is just hanging
Yeah.
over the industry.
yeah,
And I think until that is cleared up, it's also going to be tough for companies to do an IPO, frankly. I mean, it's just hanging over us. And hopefully, again, that, kind of goes away or gets resolved here in the near future. I'm actually pretty optimistic about that.
yeah. Hopefully, there's
We've
some
had a lot of
guidelines.
discussions, but
Like, yeah, Uber says how
yeah,
much you can make if you're an Uber driver. Hopefully, we can have some guidelines in our industry that are okay.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. We would
Yes.
need some clear guidelines. I think everyone would appreciate that.
Yeah, there's more free speech in the rest of the world than there is here in the US on this
Yeah.
stuff sometimes, it feels
Yes.
like. So,
Oh,
yeah.
agreed.
Right. So, Troy, before we go, I have a last question for you. What
Oh, yeah.
pitfalls have you seen companies walk through would warn listeners about today?
The failing to do a process that we talked about before, I think that those people, I think failing to do a process, that can be a big issue for sellers. So
Yeah.
buyers, we haven't talked too much about due diligence, and I think we should talk about that for a second here, because that
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
biggest pitfall is buying
Yeah.
something and you don't know what you're getting. And it's so, you kind of get like this, this deal frenzy a little bit. And you're like, I've
Yeah.
invested a lot of time into this deal. I know this is the right deal for our company. I don't want to be slowed down. I might lose the deal. I don't want to slow down while we look at this issue or that issue. And that is so, it takes good judgment to say, okay, here's the right time to move ahead or not. But man, so many companies have been, so many, and I'm just saying like two or three, like it's so many companies have been taken down because they did the wrong deal, or even strategically it was the right one, but it came with a stinking mess. Maybe it came with a regulatory issue. They didn't, you kind of brushed over a lot of complaints from the field. If you look at the complaint logs, or
Mhm.
or maybe an AG's office somewhere was looking at the business and you said, that's just part of the industry. We can deal with that. You need to look really close at those, because sometimes
Yeah.
those, as we've seen, those can blow up and be
Yeah.
big. And it used to be like early in my career for a lot of years, and I still hear it sometimes. You'd hear people say, but I'm going to flip on that. Uh, I would hear people say, well, we really need to be super careful because most deals fail.
Mhm.
And that was from this old study kind of in the early 2000s that really did say 70% of mergers don't bring the value people expect them to bring. It was kind of a qualified statement. Well, 20 years later, just a few years ago, Harvard Business Review came out and said that might have been true then. That is obviously flipped now. 70% of deals are successful today. And
Wow.
so the odds are with you, but the reason those other 30% aren't successful is because of those due diligence issues. And the reason that the script is flipped on that is because people have gotten better, have better
Yeah.
processes. The consultants have gotten better. Like, we've seen more,
Yeah.
so we know how to advise companies. And the companies themselves have, again, just you have quality of earnings that we used to not have early on. So I think
Yeah.
things have changed significantly. Deal making tends to be successful 70% of the time, but you still have to take the time and do it right. And if you don't, if you try to rush it, you could end up, really not just having a bad deal, but buying something that distracts you and sets your company back years.
That is the real pitfall we've seen in the space is you want two plus
Yeah.
two to equal five, not two plus two to equal
Mhm.
three, or God forbid
Yeah.
two, right? And that's
Yeah.
actually happened at times. Troy and I were both speaking at the Channel Summit earlier this year, and last year at the Channel Summit they grabbed a case study, and I won't quote who it was, but it was a $180 million year company, about a $130 million year company. The next year it did 170 million. And you say,
Yeah.
oh shoot, like what just happened there? And that all at times is like what distraction will this be for people, and how will I execute this story in a powerful way? And some of the most successful acquisitions that we think about, that I get excited about, are what we talked about earlier, some of the geographic expansion deals. Like when you think of that 70% of the really good ones, what we hear about is, some of you have a desire or appetite to expand in other countries, or to go get there and do that, and or even to upgrade systems or platforms, and there's a lot of great opportunities to do that through acquisition, right, inside of that space. I've actually, even myself, I've rebuilt software for companies because they acquired my client. I've had multiple of those instances where my client got acquired and I ended up rebuilding platforms and tools for the whole
Huh.
company, because it was an excuse, right? Of, oh, this acquisition's happening. Oh, here's our new system. And it wasn't so much pain and change in that world as it would have been had they just done a system change on its own, because oh yeah, it's part of the new deal that's happening, right? It was an excuse for people to say, oh, I'm going to relearn, some of the basics in the back office or some of the other things. So there are some
Yeah.
opportunities to use change well. And then the change management of it is just so important. One pitfall that I would highlight that actually came out of our previous session. So Umair and I
Hmm.
got a chance to have Kelly Lewis on the line. Kelly was a big part of the growth at Beauty Counter over the years, and before that, 31 Gifts, Lee Monroe.
Yeah.
And in there, she talks about actually doing the work of connecting with people. We even had Gaia, who's just
Yeah.
launched the new sub company for Young Living with Wild Notes, on a previous session.
Hmm.
And both what you'll hear from Gaia, you'll hear from Kelly, you'll even hear it from Danielle Brown, who's running Yoli today. All three of those women we'll talk about in these transitions, not just doing the webinars and the weekly webinars to get people on, but doing
Yeah.
the work of all the one-on-ones. You'll hear it from all three women. And I can't say
Yeah.
that enough, is that I think about pitfalls, I listen to Troy and Umair and what I'm seeing in some of the seminar activity.
Yeah.
is we think we can just shoot out the newsletter and the press release, or just shoot out we're just going to do the 4 webinars and get everyone on the same page. And you forget the human element that's so critical in our space
Yeah.
of doing
Yeah.
sometimes the hard work of 100 one-on-ones with top leaders of the new company you're acquiring, and the 100 one-on-ones with your existing company to let them know why you're acquiring the other company. And so
hearts and minds, that's the biggest part of integration.
Yeah, and you want all the humans on both sides of these transactions to say, yeah, this is great. Like, this is good, because you want all those hallway conversations, all those text messages after the meeting to be met with love. And this is the right decision, not, oh, I don't know, we'll see how it goes over the next few months, right? And so as a real, well, yeah, we're
going to send out our policies and procedures, or here's the integration manual, and we expect everyone to do their part. And that's the case. I mean, our industry is particularly social, and the one thing I love is everyone loves to talk to each other. So that's But I've been in industries where it's not the case. I mean, for a lot of years I was in a very industrial industry, and that was not the case. But still, you just had to do it. You had to go get on a plane and go over and sit down. Otherwise, you didn't really know what you were getting into, and you just didn't know what the future was going to be if you couldn't sit down and get a feel for where people are headed in there, and what they're seeing on the ground. So I agree with that.
Just such a total treat to be on today. I want to thank you, Umair, for hosting the show. Troy, I want to thank you for being on and sharing the frameworks. For those of you that would like to meet Troy, we'll put his info in the show notes so you guys can connect with him at Dorsey and me. And if you come to many of the conferences, whether it's Channel Summit or Troy's been very involved in our space, as well as if you are a local to Utah company, check out the Direct Sales Coalition, because that's another place. It's just a powerful resource for you to be able to
It's doing great work. That coalition is one of the most amazing things that I've been a part of here in Utah and in the industry. So thank you for that. Thank you guys. Yeah.
You got it. And for those of you that are brand new to the show, who are just watching on the stream today, whether you're on LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, know that to truly participate in the Direct Selling Executive Forum, you want to join the free LinkedIn group. There's no cost to be involved in the DSEF. It's an invite-only community for direct selling executives. All right. So all you have to do is go on LinkedIn, type in Direct Selling Executives Forum, click and apply. If you're an active direct selling executive in the space, they're going to let you in. Okay. The gatekeepers are nice people, right? They're going to just check that you truly are someone who's working for a direct selling company, and are then going to invite you into the group. But go ahead and apply. You can also go to directsellingexecutivesforum.com, or you can subscribe on Spotify and Apple. It was a total treat to be here today. Thank you so much, Troy, for your time. Thank you, Umair. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
Have an amazing day, everybody. We'll see
you guys. Loved it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Bye for now. Bye.
If you haven't yet joined the DSEF group on LinkedIn, go to directsellingexecutiveforum.com, or go on LinkedIn and search for Direct Selling Executive Forum to apply. The group is free and is an invite-only community of direct selling executives by direct selling executives.